On November 12, 2025, at 6:42 a.m., the calm of the Caribbean Sea shattered in an instant. At 7,100 meters above the silver water surface, a USF/A-18E Super Hornet was patrolling a military trade corridor worth $4.2 billion per week, transmitting encrypted data back to the Pentagon every second. It was a routine mission until those faint signals began appearing more and more frequently. Caracas believed the Hornet had violated its air defense zone music, and it activated Operation Garls, deploying two F-16A Vipers armed with $9.4 million worth of missiles. This was not an interception. It was a challenge and attack aimed directly at the United States Navy. Immediately, the U.S. responded, dispatching the USS Dunham, firing three SM-6 missiles and sending two F-35 Lightning II fighters into the fight. Could Venezuela's flankers really take down the most advanced stealth fighters on Earth? Let's uncover the truth. 6:42 a.m. November 12, 2025. Caribbean Sea, 41 nautical miles east of Curacao. At dawn, the Caribbean often resembles a sheet of silver glass stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Yet, cutting through that stillness was one of America's most dangerous sentinels. An F/A-18E Super Hornet callsign Falcon 21 maintaining patrol at 23,500 ft 7,100 m. This aircraft was part of a security lattice guarding a $4.20 $2 billion military transport corridor, strategic artery running from Key West to the Lesser Antilles. Its A/APG-79 radar swept 200 degrees of sky every few seconds, hunting for threats that were never meant to slip this close. From altitude, the jet system streamed 2.88 GB of sensor data per second straight to the Combat Information Center aboard the USS George Washington, 150 nautical miles away. Armed with two RIM 116 rolling airframe missile launchers and a crew of 450 sailors, the ship's firepower surpassed the entire northern Venezuelan fleet. A single coded alert from the FA-18E could awaken an $80 million weapons package engineered to respond within 2 seconds from detection to launch. 7:02 a.m. The sun had just crested the Aragua Valley when alarms began blaring inside Venezuela's Fusa Area Bolivariana Air Base. The radar operator watching from an underground command bunker detected a faint contact, tagged with red alert, moving at Mach 1.2, 42 miles off the coast. The echo pulsed across their screens like a heartbeat no one could ignore. Within 90 seconds, encrypted warnings were transmitted to President Nicolas Maduro Moro's inside the Miraflores Palace. He saw only one image, a gray silhouette labeled FA-18E Super Hornet breaching what Caracas called its restricted air defense ring music. His decision was immediate. This is not a routine patrol, he told his staff. This is a provocation. Now over the Caribbean Sea, the storm had begun to breathe. At 7:21 a.m., inside the Miraflores Palace, President Nicolas Maduro Moro stood, surrounded by his generals, all of them focused on the grainy radar image of a USF/A-18E drifting near the edge of Venezuela's flight identification zone. To him, this wasn't reconnaissance, was provocation. They want to test our resolve, he said. Then let them see the sky still belongs to us. By 7:42 a.m., General Lenin Lorenzo Ramirez Vizum, commander of the Venezuelan Air Force, had issued an emergency intercept order at El Libertador. The reaction was immediate. Two F-16A Block 15 Vipers, each upgraded with Israel's EL/M2032 radar and carrying a combined 9.4 million worth of AM-7 Sparrow missiles, were rolled onto runway 02. Their Pratt & Whitney engines roared with 23,830 pounds of thrust, shaking concrete slabs. Older than most pilots stationed there. The mission was named Operation Garls, a title symbolizing what Caracas called a defensive lesson. Within 12 minutes, both Vipers were airborne, climbing music past 21,000 feet in under 90 seconds, slicing northward at Mach 1.28. Ground controllers fed them constant updates, guiding them toward a faint glimmer labeled Falcon 21. Venezuelan radar stations tracked both jets as they closed in on the U.S. aircraft, now 42 nautical miles northeast of Puerto La Cruz. The atmosphere in the control room shifted from routine to suffocating tension. In the underground command bunker in Caracas, a colonel whispered the one thing no one wanted to say aloud: if we cross this line, there's no going back. Meanwhile, aboard the USF A-18E, the pilot of Falcon 21 detected two faint, fast-moving contacts approaching, unidentified, traveling at over 900 miles per hour. His voice stayed steady, but his finger tapped the emergency transmitter twice. Two hostile aircraft inbound. Request authentication and support. The message shot outward like lightning. 150 nautical miles in 0.7 seconds. straight into the combat information center of the USS George Washington. The countdown to confrontation had begun. Are the Venezuelans simply flexing their strength or preparing for war? Share your thoughts in the comments below. At 8:12 a.m., Falcon 21 detected the first electrical pulse, a sudden surge of energy piercing the quiet Atlantic sky. The Super Hornet's threat warning receiver flashed a deep crimson to aircraft high-speed hotter signatures than any civilian plane and closing the distance with a combined speed of 1,438 knots. The Venezuelan F-16s had arrived. From the southwest, Viper 1 and Viper 2 dropped down into the sun using the blinding light as a natural shield. Bold tactic but extremely dangerous when executed at Mach 1.31. Music there. Radar shifted into track while scan mode, sweeping a 240 square mile combat zone every 2 seconds. The pilots had rehearsed this maneuver 67 times in simulators. Today it was no music, longer practice. At a range of 56 nautical miles, Falcon 21, music, tight, formation and prepared for identification. But the Vipers gave no alert, no warning, no radio, no challenge, only silence. Music, then. Inside Viper 1's cockpit, a single tone, confirmed lock tonificado. The sound echoed. At 8:14 a.m. the first AM-7 Sparrow missile left the rail. At Mach 4, accelerating music to 3,100 mph in less than 5 seconds. The missile cost $242,000, but its purpose was priceless. Descendant message Washington could not ignore. 7 seconds later, the second Sparrow fired. Beneath Viper, music 2 ripping through the thin Caribbean air. Inside the Super Hornet, music, Falcon 21 felt the cockpit shudder as the radar alarm welled. Missile launch range 22 kilometers. Time to impact, music, 11 seconds. The pilot banked hard right, pulling 7.8 gs, dumping flares into the glittering thick clouds. The first Sparrow missed by 13 m, detonating with a shockwave equivalent to 57 music kg of TNT, shoving the Hornet sideways. But the second missile was smarter. Seeker auto-corrected mid-course, ignored the flares and tightened its attack angle. At 8:16 a.m. it struck. The explosion tore through the left stabilizer, ripping away 1,200 pounds of composite structure and severing the Alpha 4 hydraulic line. Pressure collapsed from 3,000 pi to 420 pi within seconds. Fire warnings lit up across the interface. The Hornet plunged violently, losing 1,900 feet, about 580 m, in 10 seconds. Falcon 21 wrestled with the controls, breathing steady but strained. Mayday, mayday. I've been hit. Fuel line ruptured. Preparing to ditch. From 22 miles away, the Vipers saw the smoke trailing behind the American jet. To them, it looked like victory, but it wasn't. To them, it was a victory. The Americans aboard the USS George Washington, it was a declaration of war. The hunter had been wounded, and the response would be beyond words. The distress signal had reached the U.S. carrier, but what came next was beyond anything anyone could imagine. Stay with me because the American response is something the world has never seen. 8:22 a.m., the distress signal from Falcon 21 reached the USS George Washington in 0.82 seconds, faster than the human blink. Inside the combat information center, every console shifted to a blood-red warning state. Telemetry showed severe structural damage, altitude steadily dropping, and a trail of fuel stretching nearly 1.8 miles behind the wounded Hornet. Rear Admiral Thomas Reeves did not hesitate. Activate Iron Shield. Neutralize every hostile. At 8:26 a.m., the order rippled across the strike group located 170 nautical miles away. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Jason Dunham rotated its vertical launch system VLS toward bearing 191 degrees with a metallic roar. The first RIM 174 Standard Missile 6 launch, a 3,300 pounds interceptor about 1,500 kilograms, flying at Mach 3.5, capable of killing targets 240 nautical miles away. 3 more followed, each missile worth $4.3 million, forming an American steel spearhead racing toward the fleeing F-16s. The Venezuelan pilots watched their radar warning receivers light up again. Multiple locks, multiple tracks, possible collision. Viper 1 yanked hard left, pulling 8.9 G, dumping flares burning at 3,200 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,600 degrees. Viper 2 pushed into full thrust, punching through a cloud bank at 28,000 FT, 8,540 meters, trying to escape the tightening web of electronic interference. But the SM-6 does not rely on eyesight. It hunts thermal signatures, radar traces, and electronic noise simultaneously, an algorithm built to erase evasive maneuvers. At 8:40 a.m. the first SM-6 found its prey. The blast erupted 18 meters from Viper 1, a tungsten cloud shredding both tail fins instantly. The F-16 rolled into an uncontrollable left dive before disintegrating at 3,600 kmh, scattering 1,200 kilograms of debris across the sea. 2 seconds later, the second missile hit the remaining fuselage of Viper 1, vaporizing it midair. Viper 2 attempted to retaliate. The pilot fired an AIM-9L Sidewinder blindly into the sky, but the NSLQ-32V7 electronic warfare suite aboard USS Dunham jammed the missile seeker, breaking lock in 0.04 seconds. At 8:41 am, the third SM-6 struck. It ripped through Viper 2's right intake, igniting the engine core. The jet spiraled downward in a burning corkscrew, disappearing beneath the waves 11 miles east of La Tortuga. No ejection, no parachute. But the U.S. response was not finished. At 8:47 a.m., two F-35 Lightning IIs, Raptor 41 and Raptor 42, launched from the George Washington, each armed with AM-120D, AM-RAMs and AGM-88E, ARGM anti-radiation missiles. Their mission was clear: undersurrender Venezuela's air defense network. At 9:05 a.m., the F-35s crossed the radar horizon of northern Venezuela. Ground-based tracking stations attempted to lock on, but every attempt drowned in electronic noise as American jammers blasted 300 kilowatts of interference. At 9:27 a.m., both F-35s fired. The arms screamed downward at 2,280 miles per hour, slamming into the Punta Cajara radar station, destroying a $96 million sensor array and rendering northern Venezuelan airspace blind. Just 12 minutes, the balance of power in the Caribbean had flipped, and the world had only begun to understand the price. The sea was quiet again by 9:45 a.m., but only on the surface. Beneath the calm, the wreckage of one F/A-18E and two Venezuelan F-16s drifted across 31 square miles of water carried by slow morning currents. The air still held the faint metallic smell of burning JP-5 fuel, an echo of the violence that had erupted less than an hour earlier. 9:52 a.m., a Navy MH-60 Ercea Hawk found Falcon 21 alive, floating in a half-collapsed life raft, his flight suit scorched, his oxygen hose shredded by shrapnel. He had hit the water at 142 knots, hard enough to break ribs, yet he had survived. Medical crews later confirmed he lost 38% hydraulic function before ejecting. Music, numbers that made the entire air wing shake their heads in disbelief. His FA-18E, worth $70 million, now rested at the bottom of the Caribbean at a depth of 2,270 feet, broken into 6 major segments. But inside its black box was something far more valuable: recording of the Venezuelan radar frequencies, missile guidance patterns, and electronic signatures used during the attack. Intelligence analysts later described it as a complete digital fingerprint of the Venezuelan Air Force. Meanwhile, the consequences in Venezuela spread like wildfire. By 10:30 a.m., news of the destroyed F-16's music had forced the government into emergency broadcast. Families gathered outside the gates of El Liberator Air Base, seeking names. 47 personnel were still unaccounted for after the U.S. ARG strike collapsed 2 radar bunkers. The financial toll skyrocketed. 2 F-16A fighters lost $86 million. Punta Cajara radar site $96 million destroyed. Support infrastructure $41 million in damage. Total military loss $223 million. In under 22 minutes. At 11:05 a.m. state television abruptly went dark for 6 hours, the longest blackout since 2019. Rumors flooded the streets of Caracas. Whispers of command failures, arguments inside the palace, even reports of 3 senior air defense officers resigning. Within minutes of learning the radar grid was gone, international reaction came just as fast. Washington released a concise statement: the United States did not music fire first. The Pentagon added that the engagement lasted 31 minutes, the fastest and most one-sided aerial exchange in the Caribbean since the 1983 Grenada operation. NATO analysts labeled it bluntly a decisive demonstration of air-sea integration, precision over provocation. By noon, the sea was calm once again, only drifting oil machines and silent radar screens marked what had happened. But for the governments watching from afar, one truth lingered like smoke over the horizon. In modern warfare, pride is not protection, it is the fuse. By mid-afternoon, the battle over, the Caribbean had already migrated from the sky to the marble corridors of global diplomacy. At 3 p.m. sharp, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session, its first Caribbean-related meeting in 11 years. Delegates filed in with stacks of documents and screens lit up with satellite images taken just 40 minutes after the missile strikes. The world was ready to hear what had happened. Venezuela spoke first. Their ambassador, jaw clenched, accused the United States of violating sovereign airspace and claimed the F-16s had acted in lawful self-defense. He cited a disputed flight identification zone drawn in 2012, a line so controversial that 9 countries never recognized it. His voice trembled not with fear but with the weight of political survival. Then the U.S. representative rose. She tapped the remote. The chamber's lights dimmed. The screen appeared the radar replay. From the USS George, Music, Washington. A crisp timeline showing Venezuela's F-16s locking onto the American FA-18E 38 seconds before any Venezuelan radio transmission. Another slide showed the exact coordinates of the attack 118.7 nautical miles from the nearest Venezuelan shoreline, undisputed international airspace. A final image displayed the debris field spread across 31 square miles, proving the engagement had taken place far from any territorial claim. The room fell silent. Colombia's ambassador broke that silence, condemning Venezuela's reckless escalation. Brazil called the attack an unnecessary gamble with regional stability. Even Mexico, normally neutral, voiced deep concern, noting that energy routes worth $11.44 billion per quarter run through the same corridor. Inside the Venezuelan delegation, tension cracked wide open. One advisor whispered urgently to another. Their ambassador avoided eye contact, his argument dismantled in less than 4 minutes. When the U.S. representative finished, she left the chamber with one line that echoed through every news broadcast that evening. America did not fire first, but America will always finish the fight. The diplomatic storm had begun, and for Caracas, the fallout was only just starting. By early evening, the story had escaped the walls of diplomacy and detonated across the global media landscape. 6:40 p.m., CNN released the first high-resolution satellite map of the engagement zone, complete with timestamps, missile trajectories, and the precise moment Venezuela's F-16 radar locked onto Falcon 21. Within 14 minutes, the segment hit 2.3 million views on YouTube alone. Fox News followed with a 3D simulation that stunned viewers nationwide. The reenactment captured the AI-7 Sparrows impact against the F/A-18E at exactly 7:14:18 a.m., showing the stabilizer shredding in a burst of molten metal. The video triggered 8,700 calls to local radio stations in just 1 hour, many from veterans who recognized the maneuver instantly. One caller from Ohio said quietly that pilot had 5 seconds of life he turned into 15. The clip went viral across veteran communities. NBC went further. They interviewed Rear Admiral Thomas Reeves, who revealed that the SM-6 missiles intercepting the Venezuelan jets had closed the distance at 3,500 foot-pers, faster than a rifle bullet. The newsroom gasped. For millions watching at home, the sheer speed of modern warfare became suddenly terrifying and real. Meanwhile, social media turned incandescent. On X, the hashtag Falcon 21 reached 29 million impressions before midnight. A slow motion video of the rescue helicopter approaching the crash site gathered 6.1 million likes. In Miami's Cuban-American districts, crowds gathered on Cala Oo, waving both American and Navy flags. They had seen too many dictatorships make the same mistake, but nowhere was the emotional impact stronger than in the living room of Falcon 21's parents. ABC's evening broadcast showed the moment they learned their son had survived. The father's voice cracked as he said, "He's coming home. That's all that matters." Across America, televisions flickered late into the night. This wasn't just another headline. It was the moment the country realized someone had tried to kill an American pilot and failed. While American cities glowed with relief, Venezuela sank into turmoil. 10:15 p.m., only hours after the UN confrontation, chaos erupted inside El Bertader Air Base, the same airfield that had launched the 2 F-16s that morning. Families of fallen airmen gathered outside the main gates, demanding answers. Some had waited over 13 hours without a single official update. Music, others carried photos of sons who never returned from the failed interception. At 10:27 p.m., a leaked internal memo hit Venezuelan social media. Radar layer Bravo experienced intermittent failure for 27 minutes prior to engagement. The post was viewed 4.8 million times in under 2 hours. Inside the command building, the atmosphere was toxic. 3 high-ranking officers, General Morello Cardenas, Colonel Luis Ferrardo, and the head of Air Defense Operations, Brigadier Sands, were quietly relieved of duty. By midnight, all 3 were placed under protective detention, a phrase Venezuelans recognized as code for political scapegoats. Meanwhile, music. At the Miraflores Palace, President Alejandro Rojas convened an emergency defense council. The mood was grim. Damage assessments revealed that the US ARDM strike had destroyed 92% of the Puna Cahara radar grid, leaving the northern air corridor effectively blind. Rebuilding it would cost $118 million and take 14 to 18 months, assuming sanctions didn't tighten further. But the military's biggest problem wasn't hardware, it was morale. A classified survey conducted inside the Air Force revealed that 61% 24% of personnel blamed their own leadership for the disaster. Another 23% believe the F-16 should never have been sent against a U.S. carrier group. Fear spread like smoke through the barracks. Fear of reprisals, fear of further U.S. retaliation, fear that their country had crossed a line it could not walk back. Outside on the streets of Caracas, protesters gathered in Plaza Bolivar. Some chanted for justice, others demanded Rojas resign. One sign captured the sentiment of a nation. They sent our pilots to die for pride. For Venezuela, the military defeat lasted 22 minutes, but the political collapse had only just begun. While Caracas battled internal chaos, Washington moved with quiet precision. At 7:30 a.m., the Pentagon's National Military Command Center activated its crisis protocol, condition flame level 2, a posture reserved for direct attacks on U.S. military personnel. Only 5 times since 1983 had this status been used. Inside the steel-walled briefing chamber, the Joint Chiefs gathered around a glowing 14-foot digital map of the Caribbean. 4-colored corridors marked every strategic lane of commerce, totaling $11.4 billion in monthly U.S. trade. Venezuela's attack had threatened one of those arteries, something no administration could ignore. Secretary of Defense Karen Whitfield delivered the first directive. We stabilized the region immediately. Within minutes, Operation Sentinel anchor was outlined. A 4-layer response designed to reassert U.S. dominance without escalating into a regional war. Layer 1, naval reinforcement. Second, carrier, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower. Music was ordered to redeploy from Norfolk, bringing 74 additional aircraft and 5,000 sailors into the theater. The move doubled American air power in the Caribbean in less than 36 hours. Music, Layer 2 surveillance surge 4P8. A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft were assigned to blanket the sea with wide area radar capable of detecting movements across 88,000 square miles. Every hour, analysts called it an electronic curtain. No fighter can slip through. Layer 3 regional support. Colombia, Panama, and the Dominican Republic agreed to share radar feeds in real time. Combined, their data produced a tracking grid 47% more accurate than Venezuela's entire air defense network. Music, Layer 4 economic leverage. The State Department drafted a compensation demand for $292 million. The exact cost of the destroyed U.S. aircraft, the rescue effort, and damages assessed from the attack. Failure to comply would trigger secondary sanctions, targeting Venezuela's oil exports, already down 38% in the past year. Later that afternoon, Congress convened a bipartisan session. The debate was fiery, but one line silenced the chamber. If they strike an American pilot, they strike 330 million Americans. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. was not preparing for war, was preparing to make sure this never happened again. Across Latin America, the aftershocks from the Caribbean clash spread faster than any missile fired the previous morning. At 11:20 a.m., Colombia became the first nation to react, ordering 6,800 troops to reinforce its border with Venezuela. Intelligence briefings warned that Caracas might lash out to distract from its internal meltdown. Bogotá refused to take that risk. Farther south, Brazil's Ministry of Defense held an emergency meeting of the Conselho Militar. Their assessment was blunt. Regional stability has entered its most fragile state in 40 years. Brazil quietly raised its air defense, alert to level amber, a status not seen since the 2008 Andean crisis. Cuba, meanwhile, condemned the U.S. response, but did so cautiously. Analysts noted Havana avoided mentioning the destroyed F-16s entirely, a sign it did not want to be dragged into a confrontation it couldn't afford. Mexico took a different route. Music, silence. It's foreign. Ministry simply stated it was monitoring developments, but behind closed doors, Mexican officials privately expressed fear that trade routes worth $38 billion annually could be disrupted if tensions escalated. By noon, the region understood an unsettling truth. This wasn't just a skirmish between two nations. It was a spark in the whole Caribbean was sitting on dry powder. At 2:45 p.m. November 14, 2025, the crisis took a darker turn. Inside a sealed briefing room at Langley, a team of CIA and DIA analysts unveiled what they had pulled from the recovered F/A-18E black box, data that would stun even seasoned intelligence officers. The recordings revealed that Venezuela's radar system during the attack did not match the signatures of its standard and /TPS-70 arrays. Instead, music analysts identified a hybrid frequency pattern tied to Iranian-made FAC radar. Nodes, systems capable of jamming at 62%. Higher power than Venezuela's known. Inventory. More shocking still, the AM-7. Missiles fired at Falcon 21 showed modified seeker behavior consistent with Syrian origin firmware and illegal. Battlefield rewrite prohibited under 2 separate UN resolutions. Then came the most explosive detail. Satellite logs placed 11 Iranian military advisors at Al Liberator Air Base within 6 hours of the engagement, coinciding exactly with the time frame when Venezuela ordered its F-16s into the air. Their presence had never been disclosed. When the findings were presented to the National Security Council, one advisor summed it up bluntly. Venezuela pulled the trigger, but someone else loaded the weapon. The revelation shifted the entire narrative and pushed the crisis onto a global stage.